is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with the body. You can sleep 8 hours and wake up already exhausted because the tiredness was never in your legs or your shoulders. It was in your mind, which never really stopped moving. It kept turning things over long after the day was finished with them. It kept replaying a conversation, rehearsing a reply, revisiting a decision that has already been made, checking and rechecking a worry that has no new information to offer it. If that sounds familiar, you are not imagining it, and you are not doing anything wrong. A mind that has too much to hold will keep sorting through it again and again, the way hands keep patting down pockets for keys that are already there. It isn't malfunctioning. It's simply looking for a place to set something down, and it hasn't found one yet. So for a little while, let this be that place. You don't have to organize anything right now. You don't have to finish a single thought. You can let sentences trail off in the middle, the way they do late at night, and nothing will be lost. There is nowhere else you need to be inside your own head. Just here, just this. Overthinking rarely feels like thinking too much while it's happening. It feels like being responsible. It feels like care. If I go over this one more time, surely I'll catch the thing I missed. If I imagine every version of tomorrow, surely I'll be ready for whichever one arrives. There is a kind of logic to it, even a kind of love in it. The mind trying to protect you by staying one step ahead of everything that could go wrong. But there's a strange thing about staying one step ahead of everything. It means never actually arriving anywhere. It means a present moment keeps getting traded for a future one, and that future one, once it comes, gets traded again for the next. The mind that overthinks is rarely unkind to you. It's just terribly overworked, standing guard at a door where, most nights, nothing was ever going to come through. Perspective doesn't ask you to stop guarding the door. It just asks you to notice how long you've been standing there, and whether the door is even the one that needed watching. Think of how a single thought, turned over enough times, begins to feel enormous. Not because it grew, but because you kept picking it up. A worry examined once is information. The same worry examined for the 40th time in an hour is no longer information at all. It's just weight. The same shape passed from hand to hand until your hands forget what it felt like when it was still light. This is worth noticing gently, without judgment. Repetition can disguise itself as depth. Going over something again can feel like going deeper into it, when really, you might just be walking the same short loop, again and again, mistaking the familiarity of the path for progress along it. There's no need to fight the loop tonight. Fighting a thought is still a way of holding it. You can simply let it be here, turning slowly, while your attention rests somewhere looser, on the sound of your own breath, on the small settling of your shoulders, on the simple fact that this moment, right now, is not actually asking anything of you. Somewhere, a person who has never met you is lying awake with a thought that feels, to them, exactly as large as yours feels to you. This isn't meant to shrink what you're carrying. It's meant to widen the room around it. Your mind, in its most overwhelmed moments, tends to believe it is uniquely burdened, uniquely behind, uniquely required to solve what it's holding immediately. But minds have been doing this, turning, circling, guarding, for as long as there have been minds. You have joined something very old and very human. You are not failing at being calm. You are simply being a person whose thoughts have gotten a little louder than the moment requires. Perspective, at its quietest, is just this: the recognition that a thought and the thinker of the thought are not the same size. The thought can feel enormous, urgent, all-consuming, and you, the one aware of the thought, the one noticing it rise and circle and fall, you are larger than that. Not because you have defeated the thought, but because you were always the sky it was moving through, not the storm itself. Let that sit for a moment, without needing to be understood completely. Some ideas are better felt in passing than gripped and analysed. This is one of them. You don't have to hold on to it. It will still be true if you let it drift by. There's an old quiet observation that when you stand close enough to anything, it fills your whole field of vision. Hold your hand an inch from your eye, and it blocks out a mountain. Move it back just a little, and the mountain returns, and the hand becomes what it actually is: small, ordinary, easily held. Overthinking works like the hand held too close. A single problem, examined at a distance of 1 inch, can eclipse an entire life. Not because the problem is actually that large, but because nothing else is being allowed into view beside it. The mind, in its effort to solve something completely, presses in closer and closer, until the solving itself becomes impossible. There's no room left to see the shape of the thing, only the texture of being too near it. You don't have to move your hand away by force. You don't have to solve the problem to gain distance from it. Distance can come first, gently, just by letting your attention rest on something wider for a while. Your breathing, the quiet in the room, the fact that this exact moment doesn't require the problem to be finished in order to be survivable. There's a particular sentence overthinking likes to whisper. What if I get this wrong? It arrives in 100 forms, about 100 different situations. But it's almost always the same sentence underneath. What if I get this wrong? And underneath that sentence is often an older, quieter one. I need to be certain before I can rest. But certainty was never actually available. Not once, not to anyone. Every person who has ever made a decision, said a difficult sentence, taken a step into an uncertain day, has done it without the certainty they were hoping for. They simply reached a point where they moved anyway, carrying the not knowing with them, rather than waiting for it to disappear first. The not knowing didn't go away. They just stopped needing it to. This is not a technique. It's just something true. offered quietly. You have already done this before. You have already lived through days you couldn't have predicted, said things you couldn't rehearse enough to perfect, made decisions without the full picture. And you are still here. The evidence of your own life is standing right behind you, patiently, even while your mind insists that this time, this particular worry, is the one that finally requires full certainty before you're allowed to rest. Consider too how much of overthinking is really just love with nowhere to go. You replay the conversation because you care what the other person thinks of you. You rehearse the email 17 times because you care about doing right by the people reading it. You imagine every way tomorrow could go wrong because some part of you is trying, clumsily, to protect the people and things you value. The mind, when it spins like this, is not being cruel to you. It's being loyal, just in an exhausting, roundabout way. Like a guard dog barking at every sound, unable to tell yet which ones matter. You don't need to punish the dog for barking. You can simply, gently, let it know. Not this one, not tonight. And go on breathing anyway. There's a wider view worth returning to, again and again, in different words each time, because it rarely settles on the first pass. It is this: most of what the mind circles never actually happens, and most of what does happen turns out to be survivable in ways the circling never predicted. Not because you got lucky, but because the actual moment, when it arrives, is always simpler than its rehearsal. Real life doesn't come with the added weight of anticipation. It comes one piece at a time, and each piece, taken on its own, is almost always more manageable than the whole imagined mountain of it. This is easy to forget, and worth forgetting gently, without frustration, because the forgetting isn't a failure either. It's just what minds do. They imagine the mountain, because imagining feels like preparing. But you were never actually going to climb the mountain all at once. You are only ever going to take the next small step, and then the one after that, the way you always have. There's a kind of quiet that exists underneath noise, the way the bottom of the lake stays still, no matter how the surface moves. Storms pass over the surface of a lake constantly. Wind, rain, the churn of things falling in. But a few feet down, none of that motion reaches. The water there simply is. It doesn't resist the storm above. It just isn't where the storm is happening. Somewhere in you, underneath the noise of the circling thoughts, there is a place like that. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's not something you have to build or earn. It's simply farther down than the thinking. And it has been quiet this whole time, waiting without impatience, the way still water waits without needing the storm to end. You don't reach that place by fighting the surface. You reach it by remembering it's there and letting your attention rest toward it, the way you might remember mid-argument that there is a whole quiet house around the room you're standing in. Consider for a moment how much of what troubles the overactive mind is not the situation itself, but the story being told about the situation. The situation is usually a fact, a message unanswered, a task unfinished, a conversation that didn't go as planned. The story is everything built on top of that fact. What it means, what it will lead to, what it says about you. The fact tends to be small, the story tends to be enormous. And it's almost always the story, not the fact, that keeps a person awake. This isn't a call to stop telling stories. Stories are how minds make sense of things. That isn't a flaw to fix. But it helps sometimes just to notice the seam between the two. To notice quietly, this is the fact, and this is the story I'm building on top of it. Because a story that's been noticed as a story has already lost some of its grip. It's no longer indistinguishable from the truth. It's just one shape the mind is trying on, among many it could try instead. There's an old idea, older than any single tradition, that suffering often comes not from what happens, but from the gap between what happens and what we insisted should happen instead. The overactive mind, in its most overwhelmed moments, is usually holding tightly to some version of how things should be going, and measuring the actual moment against that should over and over, and finding it lacking every time. The tiredness isn't from the moment, it's from the measuring. You don't have to stop wanting things to go well. Wanting things to go well is simply part of caring. But there's a difference between wanting and insisting, and it's worth noticing, gently, which one you're doing tonight. Wanting can rest alongside what is. Insisting cannot rest at all. It has to keep fighting the moment, for as long as the moment refuses to match the picture. Let the insisting soften, just slightly if it will. Not because the want was wrong, but because a held hand tires faster than an open one. And you've been holding on for a long time now. There's something almost funny, in a tender way, about how seriously the mind takes its own predictions. It forecasts disaster with total confidence, the way a person might insist on tomorrow's weather, despite having been wrong about it 100 times before. And yet each time, the mind treats its forecast as certain. This isn't a character flaw. It's just what minds do when they're trying hard to keep you safe. They'd rather overwarn 1,000 times than underwarn once. But you're allowed to notice the pattern warmly, without needing to argue with it. There goes the forecast again, and you can hold it a little more loosely than you did the last time. Think of how differently a single day looks, depending on where you're standing when you look at it. From the middle of it, tired, behind, holding 6 unfinished things at once. A day can feel like proof that everything is too much. But stand at the end of the same day, later, looking back, and it often looks entirely different, smaller, more ordinary, already absorbed into the quiet fact of having happened. Nothing about the day changed, only the distance from which it was seen. This is perspective in its simplest form, not a philosophy, just a change of position. The same thought, held at a different distance, weighs differently. And distance isn't something you have to travel far to find. Sometimes it's as close as a breath, as close as noticing mid-thought that you are the one noticing. There's a kind of relief available in remembering how much has already resolved itself without your constant supervision. Not because you didn't care, but because most things, given enough time, find some kind of shape on their own. Sometimes a shape you feared, more often something quieter and more survivable than the version your mind rehearsed. You have already lived through more resolved worries than active ones. It's simply easier to remember the ones still spinning than the 100 that already went quiet. If you could see all at once every worry you've ever carried and where it ended up, you would likely notice a strange thing. Most of them simply stopped mattering. Not because they were solved with dramatic effort, but because time moved, and the moment they were about eventually passed, and something else took its place. The way weather changes without needing permission. The overwhelmed mind rarely believes this in advance. It only believes it in hindsight, quietly, almost embarrassed at how much energy was spent on something that simply moved on by itself. You don't need to trust this fully tonight. You only need to let it sit nearby as a small, undemanding fact. This has been true before, more times than you've counted. There's something worth noticing about the word enough. Overthinking often circles a hidden question. Have I thought about this enough yet? And the trouble with that question is that it has no natural end. There is always one more angle to consider, one more scenario to imagine, one more phrase to reconsider. Enough isn't a place the mind arrives at through more thinking. Enough is a decision made quietly to set the thought down before it's been picked apart entirely. Not because it's finished, but because you are allowed to be finished with it for now, whether or not it's finished with itself. That's a small kind of permission, but it's real. You are allowed to stop thinking about something before your mind says you're done. The mind's sense of done is not always trustworthy. It tends to move the finish line the closer you get to it. You, the one behind the thinking, get to decide when enough has actually been enough. Somewhere in all of this is a simple, almost embarrassingly plain truth. Rest doesn't have to be earned by finishing every thought first. You are allowed to rest in the middle of an unfinished sentence, an unfinished plan, an unfinished worry. The thought will still be there, waiting patiently, whenever you choose to return to it. And it will very likely look different by then, smaller, because you will be looking at it from a little further away. There's a difference between a thought passing through and a thought moving in. Most thoughts are only ever meant to pass through. They arrive, make their brief case, and move on. The way weather moves across the landscape without asking the landscape to become the weather. But some thoughts, especially the anxious ones, are mistaken for permanent residence. The mind treats them as if they've always been here and always will be, when really they arrived only a few minutes ago and would leave just as easily if given the room to. You can offer that room without any effort at all, not by pushing the thought out. Pushing tends to make things want to stay, but simply by not handing it a chair. Let it stand near the door if it insists on staying a while. It rarely stays as long when it isn't given a permanent seat. There's a kind of wisdom in remembering that you have thought thousands upon thousands of thoughts in your life, and only a small fraction of them turned out to matter even slightly the following week. Most simply dissolved, the way steam leaves a cup once a tea is cooled, without a trace, without consequence, without anyone, including you, remembering they were ever there. Tonight's circling thought, urgent as it feels, is very likely to join that enormous, quiet majority. Not because it isn't real right now, but because realness and permanence are not the same thing. A thought can be entirely real in this moment and still be entirely temporary. Consider too how strange it is that the mind so rarely thinks about thinking itself. It gets swept into the current of a worry and simply becomes a worry, forgetting there was ever a difference between the water and the person standing in it. But there is a difference. You can, at any point, quietly notice, I am thinking right now. And in that small noticing, something shifts. Not because the thought disappears, but because you've remembered you are not only the thought, you are also the noticing. And the noticing has never once been overwhelmed. Not in your whole life. Only the thoughts have been. This is worth returning to slowly, more than once, because it isn't a single realization, so much as a door you can walk back through as many times as you need to. Underneath every anxious spiral, there has always been a quieter awareness watching it happen, untouched by the spiral itself, patient, unhurried, entirely undamaged by however loud the thinking gets. You have never lost access to that awareness. You've only, understandably, forgotten to look for it in the middle of the noise. Look for it now, if it's easy to. Not by searching hard. Searching hard is just more thinking, dressed up as looking. But by simply letting your attention soften, the way your eyes soften when you stop trying to focus on any one point, and let the whole room come into view at once. Somewhere in that softened attention is a part of you that was never overwhelmed. It was only ever waiting for you to remember it was there.